Okay, thank you. So now we've started the recording and I'll turn it over to you, Jonathan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Banks. I am a second-year grad student at the UIC College of Dentistry. I am enrolled in the DMD PHD program that I'm happy to share with you all about, and I do research in the lab of Dr. David Reed. We're an oral biology lab, and a quick snippet of what my research is about. We're studying bone healing in the mandible, also known as the jawbone. And I graduated from UIC in the class of 2021 with my biological sciences degree. And so I stayed local, and now I'm at the dental school just a few blocks away. So I'm happy to answer any questions you all have. And thank you for showing some interest in combined dual degree programs.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Ribery. I am an M4 in the MD PHD program here at UIC. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I did my undergrad in biology at Temple University in Philadelphia. And then I did a post-bac program at the NIH for 2 years and applied to the MD PHD program. I started in 2015. Now I'm in my final year of the program. I did my PhD in microbiology and immunology, and I studied the innate immune response to group A strep, which is a bacteria that causes strep throat. And I am half Indigenous and half Iranian. So happy to talk about my journey through this long career path.
Hi, everybody. I'm May. I am a 7th year MSTP student, similar to Kate. So I'm currently in my 3rd year of med school. I did my PhD in the DiPietro lab at the College of Dentistry. Actually, I think Jonathan and I are lab neighbors, even though somehow we haven't officially met. But my work focused on a transcription factor called NRF2 and its role in diabetic wound healing. So I started the program in 2016. And before that, I did my undergrad at Harvard. I got a biology degree, and I grew up in the rural South in Texas before that. So very interesting path from that education to here. I am first generation American. My parents are Middle Eastern immigrants. So also happy to talk about that and being like the first gen student, first gen American, any of those kinds of things, especially in a STEM field. Happy you all are here. Thanks for having us.
Great, thank you so much. And had a few more people come into the chat, but just to remind you that feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will kill the recording when we're done with the Q&A part, so we can entertain your questions. So I'll go ahead and start with the first question that I had for you guys. The first question is, what is the setup of your current program at UIC, and how does it differ from the traditional medical or dental school path? And I was kind of especially interested in how your distinct programs, the PhD and the professional training, are sequenced.
I can start and talk about the MD PhD program. So the way that it works is we do 2 years of the preclinical training. So it's like all of the book knowledge that you learn in medical school. So you're just with all of the other medical students. And then you step out to do your PhD. Usually students do 4 to 5 years to do their PhD. And then you return as an M3. And you finish the last 2 years, which is your clinical training, which is rotations in the hospital. So another thing about the program at UIC is that it's a medical scientist training program, which means that it's funded by the NIH. And so this just means that we have support from the government to kind of give us like stipend and support in that manner for both our PhD and for the medical school degree.
I can share a little bit about the DMD PhD program. So different schools do it differently. And so that's kind of a cool aspect of DMD PhD programs, where if you're looking for a particular experience, one school may have it one way and one school may have it another way that you may prefer as far as the structure for the program. But typically, most DMD PhD programs are advertised as 7-year programs, and sometimes they'll range from 7 to 8 years with an additional year for the PhD usually allocated. But usually they're broken down into one of two formats. One is very similar to the MD PhD program, where we have 2 years of preclinical education. So you're sort of building hand skills and learning the foundational sciences that are related to dentistry. And then you'll take a pause and you'll jump into the PhD, which you'll focus on for 3 years and sometimes 4 years, depending on your project scope. And then for those final 2 years, you'll hop back into the clinic and resume your clinical training for dentistry. So the program in total is 7 years, but that program breakdown is not what UIC's program is. We used to have that model, but now we adopted the 3 years of PhD first, followed by 4 years of dental school all at once. And what that has allowed us to do is get students involved in research early, especially if we're coming from a research experience in undergrad or through a post-grad program. And it allows us to do all of our 4 years of dental school in a singular cohort and sort of sequentially, which a lot of students are attracted to. And so that was something that actually drew me to UIC. I got a DMD PhD offer from another program, and they did it the 2 years preclinical, then 3 years, and then 2 years of clinical afterward. So the PhD was kind of sandwiched in the middle. And I was a little more interested in UIC's format of 3 years PhD first and then the 4 years of dental school after. But depending on what you're looking for, some people like to jump right into their pre-professional program and get that preclinical information right off the bat. Just like Kate shared previously, DMD PhD programs are funded and supported by the NIH. I'm actually working on an NIH F30 grant that's due in December, so I'm trying to get that in. But in the meantime, I've been funded by the Bridge to the Doctorate Fellowship, which is an awesome fellowship program which supports underrepresented minority students pursuing STEM graduate degrees. And so not only have they provided me with tuition waivers and stipends, but they've also provided me with mentorship and just really good advice to help me, especially when I was starting off in my program. So that program is available at UIC. It's a great mentorship fellowship. And for underrepresented students, I strongly encourage you to look into it. It provides funding for the first 2 years of your research. And then that nicely lines up with, as far as in the dental school, it nicely lines up with the timeline when you'd be applying for federal funding from the NIH. And that way your funding is sustained throughout the duration of both the PhD and the DMD aspects of the program.
I have a question for you, Jonathan. Sorry. So for us, for MD PhD, because we do the first 2 years of medical school, we don't have to take as many PhD courses. So we kind of jump right into our PhDs instead of doing like a little bit more coursework. How does it work for you guys? Do you have to take?
Great question. So when we start our PhD, it is course moderate to course heavy. Depending on how you want to structure it. Since we have 3 years, the norm at UIC is that students are taking classes for your first 2 years and maybe reaching into the 3rd year, depending on how heavy you want to stack it up at the beginning. And that's kind of an anomaly in PhD programs. Not only are we trying to get a lot done in a short amount of time as far as labs specifically, but we also are trying to get a lot of foundational education and classes done quickly. And especially at the dental school, our research classes are sort of broken up into 2 types of classes. One is sort of foundational science-based, where we're taking classes with MD PhD students, with graduate students in other disciplines, nursing, pharmacy, and so many other disciplines, and we're learning sciences that aren't necessarily catered towards dentistry. And then the other half, we're taking graduate school classes with dental residents and learning how to present research in a dental context and studying dental papers and understanding where the field is going. And so those classes are more catered towards a dental PhD. And so I'm taking a full-time class schedule. I've been taking one since I started last year, and I'll be taking classes through the end of this year. And juggling the class and lab responsibilities is kind of tough, but it's sort of a trade-off where you get a lot done in a shorter period of time, which is why some of our programs are 7 years. So I appreciated it. It was the style that worked well for me. And I also like being able to learn with a diverse group of other students who aren't all DMD PhD students, while also being able to focus some of my education on the dental aspect early too.
I'll just add a quick footnote to that. For those of you considering the MD PhD side of things, The vast majority of programs, I want to say 90+% are like the 2-4-2 structure, but there are a few that do it a little bit differently. Almost every single one has you do at least 1 year of med school in the beginning. And the reason is, like Kate mentioned, it's that your PhD would take you a lot longer on the biomedical side if you didn't have some of the coursework from the beginning of med school to shorten it, because we don't have that sort of overlap that they do for the DMD. So that's something to keep in mind. It does sound super nice to be able to like stay with your med cohort the whole time, but I don't think there are any combined MD PhD programs that offer that option.
Thanks for sharing that. And I could also footnote the footnote by saying a lot of I think a good amount of DMD PhD students are the 2-4 or the 2-4-2 or the 2-3-2 with the with the PhD sandwich in the middle. But a lot more are transitioning towards the PhD being done at the beginning, in large part because sometimes funding agencies only kick in once the research starts. And so they're looking for evidence of you pursuing your PhD actively and getting data. And so some programs, like another program I was accepted to, the financial support doesn't kick in until that PhD starts. So for those first 2 years, you're paying a lot of those tuition. And so that tuition support doesn't come until later. So I think that's why some students and programs are moving towards getting the PhD started early on the dental side.
Yeah, and that actually kind of points me towards my second question, which is really just talking a little bit about funding. And, like obviously funding is a big deal when we're talking about dental and medical school, because I know that a lot of our underrepresented students are like, how can I afford it? How can I do it? So I think that definitely comes into their thought process whenever they, are looking at medical and dental. And I just wondered how much is there anything you can do to share for undergraduates interested in this, that from your perspective on the money? That's always a big issue that they're always concerned about, which is a good thing to be concerned about.
I can say a bit about this for the MD PhD side of things. So as Kate mentioned, there are kind of two types. One is the MSTP, Medical Scientist Training Program. Those are federally funded and they're funded equally across all the programs. In the US and Canada, there's about 100 MD PhD programs. Of those, between 45 and 50 are MSTPs. Those are going to be the most funded in the sense that all of med school, all of grad school is paid for, and you have stipend funding throughout your 7 to 9 years, depending on how long your PhD takes. The others, which are non-MSTP, are the like program funded or locally funded. So those will vary from no funding at all, where you're just paying full price for the whole way through, to half funding, where you get your PhD stipend and maybe they pay for half of med school, but it varies like institution to institution. Before you actually start your program, there are already some funding differences as well. Most of the time for a medical, like a straight MD only interview, you're paying for everything out of pocket, assuming they do an interview in person, which now I know is kind of a toss up. But your flights are on you, your hotel's on you, like that's all out of pocket. For most of the MD PhDs, especially the MSTP ones, many of them will reimburse you for those expenses, whereas the straight MD program may not. And then in terms of applying, the cost to actually apply is the same per program, but there are application assistance, like discounts and vouchers and things that you can apply for during the application process. And those are the same across the board, whether you do AMCAS, which is the national US application, or the TMD SAS, which is the subset Texas one. And if any of you have questions about that, I can talk about that a little bit more as well. But you start to see the big funding differences sort of once you enroll, or even like in the interview phase. But prior to that, it's kind of even. I don't know if that's the same for dental.
Sure, I could weigh in on my experience. I know when I was an undergrad, I was thinking about how do I pay for dental school, right? I was looking for ways, and as a lot of pre-dental and pre-medical students probably have heard about or have looked into to various degrees. There are some common ways that people get tuition assistance to pay besides just loans. People going to the National Health Service Corps route, where they're dedicating a few years of service on the back end of their degree in an underrepresented or in an underserved rather area. Or there's the armed forces as well, where people will serve in the Army, Navy, etc. And so I had heard about those, but I had come to one of my mentors in the College of Dentistry and sharing, I've heard about these. Is there anything else that I may be missing in my consideration for looking for ways to pay for school? And then he brought up the DMD PhD program. As I think I saw someone mention in the chat, yeah, I think Kate mentioned this, funding changes from year to year. So it's good to start asking questions early to your mentors and to any connections you may have in your school of interest, while also keeping in mind that funding changes every year, politicians change every year, and so the people behind the funding may have different motives or agendas. But once you get funded, you're secure, and so I don't have to worry about once I get a grant that the money will be pulled out from under me. And typically institutions have stepped in when students have had trouble with getting funded. At UIC, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the PhD students in their second and third years are applying for NIH funding to cover the rest of our tuition and our lab expenses and et cetera. But when in the rare cases that students don't get that funding, the institution's there to step in to provide alternatives. And we're even in discussions now on talking about TA-ships and other opportunities for grad students to help cover their tuition. So while we don't have the MSTP program on the dental side, I already mentioned the Bridge to the Doctorate Fellowship, which is an option. And we also have students who are getting funding from the institution itself as far as waiving the tuition until they get their their NIH grant. So the typical path for students is getting either funding from an institution or getting funding from an external fellowship that sort of bridges, no pun intended, from the beginning of your research program to your national funding. And as far as applying, there aren't typically costs associated with the PhD specifically, but it's a really different application experience, because when you're applying for med school or for dental school, it feels like a competition, right? You're competing with every student to your left and to your right. You're trying to get the best scores on your exams and your best GPA and your best essay. But when you're applying for a PhD program, it's sort of like dating, where you're like trying to find a good match for you, and the school is trying to see if you're a good match for them at the same time. You're trying to see if your research interests align with the school, if your research interests align with a particular PI at the school. And since PhD students, especially on the dental side, are such a rare commodity, there are some schools who will be actively recruiting for students to come to their PhD program. And so it's a nice change of pace when you're in that PhD interview, because as much as you're feeling them out, they're feeling you out at the same time. So you can find a place that's a really good match for you. And then it comes with the financial benefits as well. So there are some nice perks that come to going the PhD route if you're interested in research.
That's great. And this is one of the great things I think about this conversation, because we all know about a lot of us know about the MD PhD, but Jonathan's perspective and having that dental perspective is really cool. I'd love to have May later on just touch a little bit on that working in the dental college thing too, if there's any cultural differences that you noticed. But
I would love to.
Yeah, but looking back, what would you advise any undergraduate interested in pursuing the the plus PhD, whether it's dental or medical track in your field? And so what I mean by that is, are there particular ways that you would suggest, like finding research topics, finding undergraduate professors to work with, how to cultivate mentors, how to strategize, opportunities or trips? I know, Kate, you did fellowship afterwards, things like that.
Can I hop in on this one? I love this question because I mentioned in the beginning, I know some of you are hopped in a little later. Even before undergrad, I went to public school in the rural South. So my science education was dismal, to say the least. It was deeply unfortunate. And then I got to college and I got an amazing education, but I was really behind when I got there. So I felt like I was just like a million steps behind every other student. And that showed in my grades and it showed in my knowledge. And I was very late to even knowing that dual degree programs existed, let alone preparing for what to do for one. So I was more than halfway through college when I became aware that this option even existed. And I kind of felt like I was playing catch up from the get. And there were students who I went to school with who had done like summer MSTP internship prep programs and like things that I had never even heard of. And I say all of that not to freak you out, but to tell you that even if you don't know about those things and you don't do any of them, it's going to be okay and you can still do this. But what I would say is that if you already have a knowledge that like this exists and this is something that you're interested in, that already gives you a step ahead. And I would say to like look for similar people who have been on a path like your path and kind of ask them how they got through it. And this I'm sure will come up later in terms of choosing your mentor. But I think, and this may be a little controversial, so I hope the others will disagree with me if they do. I don't think what you study matters. I think who you study it with matters. And I chose my undergrad lab for the mentor, and I chose my PhD lab for the mentor. And I'm sure whatever research I go on to do after med school, I will choose for the group of people and not for the content. Because the point of doing research as a student is sure to learn something, but like nobody is single-handedly changing the world with their undergrad thesis. I promise you it's not going to happen. But what you are doing is learning how to be a good scientist. How do I solve problems when they come up? Where do I find money? How do I handle it when something goes wrong? What is the right way to approach a question? Who do I reach out to? And when you find mentors that help you learn those things and set a really good example for what it's like to pivot when there's a challenge or like how to structure your question, I think you benefit immensely from that. And I was able to like learn what I needed to learn and become eligible for this path because I had a mentor who heard me say, hey, I just heard about this. I don't know what to do. And she worked with me to find the people who did know something because we were both kind of flying blind. But when you have someone really supportive who will back you when you have an interest or a question, that I think is the most invaluable resource. Even if you don't know about all of those more official, like I did 12 weeks at the NIH for the summer because I knew I wanted to be an MD PhD since I was 6. I did not know any of that. And if you do, you're amazing, but I never did. So it's okay if you don't. And I think that finding people who will help you get info is the best thing you can do if you're coming from a place where you don't really know what you're looking for yet. Sorry for the long-winded answer. I will pass it over.
That was not controversial at all.
Thanks, Kate.
I mean, yeah, I agree. The mentor is so important. I will say that the topic is also important because when it's late at night and you're in the lab and you're wrestling with something and you're on the ledge of why am I even doing this, then having a slight interest in what you're doing can come in handy. But really the mentor relationship is so important because they're such a big player in your educational experience. It's kind of like, I feel like I go to analogies and sometimes they're a reach. So if they are, just hopefully we can let it go. But you know, when you were in elementary school and you had that one teacher for all of your classes, and now we're in college and we're having different professors. It's like that one person who's always there with you all the time and they are guiding your research experience and they're helping you go to the next level for years and years, not just 1 year. That's how important your mentor is. And having a good relationship with them. I have a great relationship with my mentor and it's been a blessing for my experience. And I've seen PhD students who they don't have great relationship with their mentors, and it's a stressful relationship and it's strained all the time, and it just makes for such a worse experience as a PhD student. So finding the right mentor, I would argue that it's really important and possibly more important than finding the right research topic, because you won't enjoy the topic if you don't enjoy the mentor. As far as what did I do in undergrad, I'd be interested in Kate's response, as I know May already shared, but I didn't come into undergrad looking for a PhD program. It was in my junior year when I heard that PhDs existed. And then I was I already knew that people were doing research because it was important for getting into school, but I didn't understand that a PhD was on the table for us. And so once I found out, I emailed the dean of research in the College of Dentistry. And right now, the dean who was the dean when I was an undergrad, he has moved to a different institution. So we have an interim dean now. But he's still just as receptive to receiving students. And so I emailed and I said, hey, I'm interested in your program. And like I said, there's an element of recruitment. So when you express interest, the response is typically positive. And so I shared, I'm interested in research. Can you connect me with some PIs? And so for a month, I was scheduling meetings with maybe 3 or 4 PIs in the College of Dentistry, and they were just all cool. And I said, I'm an undergrad student at UIC. I want to learn about your research and see if I could get involved. And people were just genuinely willing to take me on and give me some of their time and share their insights and research and give me a feel for what was going on. And that time was pivotal because I ended up finding a lab and doing a summer research fellowship, which I'm not sure if it's on the Excel sheet of summer opportunities, but if it's not, heads up for any pre-dental people, the UIC College of Dentistry does offer a summer research fellowship where you can come into the building over the summer and get paid to do summer dental research and present the research and get recognized for it. And so if you're interested in even just feeling out dental research, maybe you don't know if you want a PhD or not, that summer research experience for me was sort of a trial run to see, can I even do research? And then finding out that I could not only do research, but get published and go to conferences and get awards, it just made me feel like this is something that, even though I don't know any researchers in my family and growing up, I didn't really understand the importance of research. I found out that I could have a place and contribute. So I definitely recommend reaching out to your dean of research, and maybe you don't want to go to the dean. Maybe that's a little nerve-wracking. Then emailing someone who you looked up online and you saw that they have a lab and their research is interesting to you. Just letting them know, I'm a UIC student. Maybe it's at the College of Medicine or the College of Dentistry, or if you want to be bolder, I mean, Zoom is a thing now. So you can email people at other institutions, say, I'm interested in your program and your research is really cool. Is there any way that I could meet with you and talk about potential virtual collaboration? People are doing that now. So there are opportunities for you to get connected early. And when it was time for my PhD interview at the dental school, I knew almost the entire panel because I had already networked with them and just learned about their research before. So that helped me relax. So I'm not saying that that would be your perfect experience, but by reaching out early, when you have this interest, then things will typically go right and people will step in to try to support you and get you involved. And then you can really understand if you like doing research or not, and if this is something you could see yourself doing.
So for me, I also didn't find out about MD PhD until a little bit later. I didn't even have a major in college till like halfway through. So I applied. So I was thinking MD, and my professor said you should do research to boost your resume. So I started doing research. I had just like emailed a bunch of people and somebody responded, and I was just like volunteering in a lab. So that's kind of how I got my foot in the door. So I think that's how a lot of people do it. So you literally just email a bunch of people, and don't be sad if people ignore you because people are busy. And yeah, so I got my foot in the door of research, and then I applied to a program called MARC. I think now it's called Maximizing Access for Research Careers. It's an NIH funded program that was at my undergraduate institution that paired me with a lab, and I was funded, like I got a scholarship for the last years of my undergrad to do that. And that was where I built like the main mentors in my life, like research mentors. I still am in contact with them to this day. And also the lab that I joined had an MD PhD student in it, and that's how I found out about the program. So I would say as an undergrad, I wouldn't necessarily worry about like finding what research topic you want to spend your entire life researching. It's really just about finding any lab with people that are willing to teach you or like take a chance on you, because you're not really going to be doing groundbreaking things. You have to learn the basic things, how to pipette, how to make a solution, how to calculate dilutions. And get your foot in the door so that you can have more in-depth experiences after that. So I would say definitely focus on finding a lab and finding people who can help you get to that next step. But don't dwell on like what specific topic you're gonna study. Yeah.
These are really great. Let me go on to the next question. So what got you interested in the research topic that you're engaged in now? And how did you learn the skills necessary to prepare for it? And I think Kate's already kind of anticipated that answer.
Okay, mine was super easy. So our program hosts dinner seminars that all the students go to, and they invite a PI to come speak about their work. And I had a friend in the program who joined a lab and was really, really miserable, did not have a great mentor relationship. It went super south. So they quit and they switched to the lab that then I later joined. So I heard the PI speak and I was like, wow, you're awesome. And then my friend told me like her personal experience about how great it was to work with that PI. So I was like, I don't even really care what you do that much, because whatever it is, it'll probably be cool. So I just emailed her and I was like, my friend has told me great things about your lab. Your dinner seminar was awesome. Can I come rotate? And it was such a good fit, like in terms of lifestyle and like expectations and working style and all of those things, that I was like, literally, if you wanted me to watch yeast grow for 4 years straight, I probably would do it and have a good time. So the topic was completely irrelevant. Like, I cannot emphasize that more. I literally did not care. I actually don't remember what her talk was even about when I decided to join the lab. My project ended up being totally different anyway, but that is how little I cared about it. I was just like, you are the kind of person that I want to be like. So I want to learn from you so that then when I do this myself, I can do it the way that you do it. And I'm super happy with that decision. So of course I came to the lab. I had never touched a mouse ever in my life. All of my undergrad research was like aquatic stuff. I worked with salamanders. So I rolled up my first day of the rotation, like, I barely know what a mouse is, teach me everything. And everyone who was already in the lab, it's a super collaborative environment, taught me the like mouse specific things from scratch. But most of the foundational stuff, I put this in the chat too, is the same from topic to topic if you do bench work. So you can always learn a new like manual skill, but learning how to apply those skills and think critically about your work is much harder and much more important. So I just showed up total newbie style and I was like, you guys have to teach me everything because I don't know what I'm doing. But once I know how to do it, I'll be okay. And it went swimmingly. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend.
Mine was a little different. So I had a 2-year research experience in undergrad where I was like paired in an immunology lab, and immunology is really, really intense and really difficult. But it was kind of like serendipity. Like I got paired in that lab and then I just realized like the immune system is so cool. And then I did 2 years post-bac at the NIH where I was studying the immune system in a different way, like through first I studied autoimmunity and then I studied host pathogen interactions in the immune system. And so when I thought about what I wanted to do for my PhD, definitely I was interested in continuing either immunology or microbiology. And also having a lab where the PI was supportive, where he or she has a good track record of training students. And I kind of made maybe not like the smartest decision in that I joined a lab where I had a skill set that I felt I could bring to the lab. So I started an entirely new project in a lab that doesn't study immunology traditionally. And I don't like regret it, but it was very difficult. So for me, I very much knew what I wanted to study broadly. And I kind of used that to find a lab that I could kind of have my own niche in and build upon that.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned earlier when I emailed the Dean of Research, I came to him and I said, hey, these are my interests. Do you know anyone that you could point me in the right direction? And even when I came in my first year as a PhD student, I was rotating in a lab where I was enjoying what I was doing, but it didn't align with my initial research interest that I came in with. And so I sort of shared that and I said, hey, I'm doing periodontal work, but I'm really interested in oral surgery and I'm really interested in bone. And I got paired up with a mentor who studies bone regeneration and cartilage. And we do collaborate with the oral surgery department in the College of Dentistry. And it was just a really good match for me. So by just thinking about what do you think is interesting, and more than likely there's someone who studies that here. And if not, like Kate just said, we can find a way for you to still do what interests you in a place where they may not do it already. And so I came in with a few transferable skills, from being a bio major and taking bio labs and all that. So I knew how to pipette, and I already had rotated in a lab for a year. But in this lab, I was learning new things like how to handle mice and how to do surgeries on mice and how to study bone. And I never studied bone before. So as long as your interest is there and you have a mentor who's willing to support you, then you can pick up a lot of new skills quickly and become a really contributing member of the lab and just have a good time. Looking back, you can learn a lot in 6 months, in a year, in a rotation, and those skills can really give you some confidence when you're looking at a daunting, really long program.
Okay, great. So I want to ask you guys, as a student from a disadvantaged community or maybe first generation in some regard, right? Were there particular hurdles that you faced at the undergraduate level or that you face in your current program? And if so, how did you deal with them? I'm thinking here of any fears, including being the first at something in a family or in a group, or any fears like imposter syndrome or any of those kinds of things.
I love this question. Okay, I'm going to try to keep this brief. So I will say pre-college, I think, again, rural city, not really close to anything major, very poor science education. So I fundamentally started out with like a true lack of foundational knowledge and a lack of community support in a way that like no one in the community where I grew up, the vast majority don't get any education beyond high school if they even graduate, let alone a 4-year college degree or anything beyond that. So there were like no resources, no support, and it was kind of just frowned upon in general, especially for women, to want to like leave home to go to school. So that was like already a challenge. And then I got to college and I went to a really prestigious institution with a bunch of people who had like multiple degrees in their family, probably went to private school or public school on the East Coast. So their like fund of knowledge was better. They had people who had gone before them and set an example. And I think that became the biggest challenge because when I went to apply to med school, everything was brand new. Like I didn't have a single relative who had been to grad school, who had gone to college in the US, who had filled out an application, who knew what an AMCAS was, who had taken a standardized exam, like nothing. So when I went to sign up for the MCAT or figure out, what am I even supposed to do? I had nobody internal to turn to. And I think it's incredibly easy not to know how much of a role that plays for people when there is generational knowledge. And that's like setting aside generational wealth, which is like a whole different financial conversation. Just the fund of experience that you can lean on from people who've done it before you makes a huge difference. And not having that, I think, was incredibly challenging. And then I have a lot of privilege in a sense that like I'm usually like, I pass for not being any of the things that I am. So I go unscathed by a lot of the like outward discrimination. So it's a mix there, but I think the hardest thing is like knowing that you are aware of all of your identities and all of the challenges that have brought you here, but maybe all the people around you aren't. And it's really easy for society and for the system, which is already designed to be very exclusionary, to kind of let people fall through the cracks and not care that maybe there isn't the support that there should be. And sometimes the onus is put on other students to say, well, what are you guys doing to make your program more inclusive and more inviting? And they don't even think about the number of people who wanted to apply and couldn't, or applied and didn't get in, or got in and then really struggled because there was no support for them. So you kind of have to like carve your own way a little bit, and you have to look for the people who see that and know that you're there and like want to support you through it. And for me, what that has looked like is like very often in med land, in dental land, in many other higher ed lands, like you will be the only you in the room. You might be the only woman, you might be the only first gen person, you might be the only person of color, you'll be the only something. And when you find people who value and see that, they kind of build a safer space for you, and then you have more room to grow and ask questions and find support. So I specifically sought out mentors that were all women because I was like, I do not want to be the only woman in the room every day. And most of my like lab mates are first gen American, and we all kind of have that in common. Or they're like immigrants or children of immigrants. And I think like finding your community within the larger community is the best piece of advice that I can offer. And I'm very interested to hear what Kate and Jonathan have to say.
Okay, so the question was, what like hurdles have you faced? How do you deal with them? I would say the main hurdle in undergrad and still to this day is a lot of microaggressions for me personally. I've heard oh, you'll get into any program because you're a woman, because you're a person of color. Oh, you don't have to have as good of scores because you're a person of color. A lot of like dismissive language, like you don't have to be smart, or like assuming that I'm not smart enough or good enough on my own. Things like that. A lot of, just a lot of microaggressions you'll hear. That's never gonna stop though, unfortunately. You kind of just learn how to deal with them, and you kind of pick and choose who you surround yourself with or how you respond to them. Another thing is when you get to grad school, and whether you do a joint degree program or not, as somebody who is the only person in her family who's done this, there's a lot of things that people don't understand about the program, and it's very exhausting having to explain it. A lot of people don't understand that like my PhD is not 1 month, it's 4 years. Like, no, I still am not finished. Explaining yourself all the time is very exhausting. A lot of people whose whole families have gone through higher education don't have this extra emotional burden where they have to explain everything all the time to every family member. So that's been something that's been frustrating, especially now as like I'm applying to residency, like I'm almost finished, but even that, like my mom's a nurse and she still doesn't understand a lot of things about how residency works, how applications are. So it's exhausting. And then the last thing, imposter syndrome, fully have it, 100%. It's something that gets easier, and you kind of realize that everybody has it to some degree. There were so many times where I've been in this program and I'm like, why am I here? How am I here? Like, did they make a mistake? I was on the admissions committee for the MSTP a couple years ago, and I saw the applicants and I was like, oh my God, how did I get in? Like, but the matter, like the bottom line is like, I've accomplished a lot and I just have to keep reminding myself all of that and kind of block out the noise. It's something that gets easier, but it's not, again, it's something that always is there. And I found that having community and having other friends who have similar life experience really helps you kind of commiserate and kind of like emotionally validates you and gets you through it. That's been really helpful.
Thank you both for sharing. I'd like to echo my support for what Kate and May just shared. And they're way farther in their program than me, so hearing that they still deal with imposter syndrome is a little reassuring. But yeah, I think you could take the most prepared student. They don't need to be a student of color or underrepresented. I think we all struggle in this academic environment because everybody around you all the time is trying to sound smart, and we're all trying to act like we have the answers to these really tough questions when really a lot of us are struggling and wrestling, and science is hard. And especially when a lot of us come from families who, I'm not a first generation college student, but I'm a first generation scientist. And there aren't a lot of people who have pursued PhDs who look like me. I came into the dental school, and you're looking at all the photos of the researchers and the research students, and I don't see a lot of Black people here. And it makes it difficult when you're battling imposter syndrome, and sometimes you feel alone, like people don't understand what you're going through. I remember being in the lab, and during the George Floyd case and the trial and everything, and just like getting news alerts and being like, I can't talk about this to anybody because nobody really gets it. And it's just, there's an additional weight. And irrespective of just the PhD, even though I know that's the focus, but like when you go back to people in your community and you're sharing, like people are waiting for Jonathan the dentist to come back and be everybody's dentist, and people don't always understand, like I'll be a little longer than 4 years because of what I'm doing. And so there's a lot of pressure too that a lot of people feel, coupled with feeling like you're not prepared or maybe not as qualified, and it leads to a lot of challenges. And I know for me, like starting grad school, I dealt with mental health struggles that I never had experienced in undergrad and never experienced before in life, and it's really hard. And so harping back to like how important that mental relationship is, it's really critical that you at least find a place where you feel safe. Like some people don't even feel safe in their own labs, like it's survival in there, and you want to find a place where you can at least rest a little bit and share, I don't understand this, or I don't know this, or I feel like I failed in this, and that there would be people there to pick you up and support you. And that's really important. I know even within these programs, not everyone is culturally competent, not everyone is aware, and I still deal with microaggressions from people, I mean, classmates and people in the building. It's tough, but we it's sort of like, I think Kate just shared, like reminding yourself of what you've already done and what you're capable of, and trying to push past the doubt and fear that comes with finding yourself in an unfamiliar place, and just remembering what brought you here, and finding the right people to support you. You'll make it, whether that's in a combined degree program or whether that's just in med school or dental school. A lot of us go through this, and so there are people here, like the people who are on this panel, who want to support you and see you succeed too.
These are great. I want to, this next question, I want us to go through kind of quickly because the last one I really want to get to before our time's up. But this is something that undergraduates always ask me when I was a pre-health advisor. So I just kind of wanted to get your take on it. What was your application process like? How did you prepare for like the DAT or the MCAT? How did you construct your application? Like how many schools did you apply to? You know, those kinds of some data points there for them.
This is a fun one. Okay, disclaimer. So for those of you who are thinking the med route, when Kate and I applied to med school, what feels like a very long time ago now, it was the old MCAT. So it is completely different now than it was when we did it. The application has also changed slightly, and there's an additional requirement. It's like I think it's called a Casper exam, which is like a personality assessment that did not exist before as well. Not everyone will do it, but a lot of places do. And I will echo Kate's message. You can also email me too. But basically for the MD PhD, it all goes through the AMCAS, which is the overall medical application. And any program that offers the dual degree will give you the choice. Do you want to apply MD PhD, MD only, or both? You can always select to include the MD only option, and then you go through the application as you normally would. The difference is that each program will handle their interviews slightly differently. So for example, at UIC, our MSTP program does its own interviews independently from the regular med school interview and the regular PhD interview. That's kind of unusual. Most places will have you interview with the MD program, like a straight MD student, and interview with the graduate college. And then both of those will have to accept you in order for you to be accepted to the dual degree. Those are not the only two formats. There are others, but that's UIC versus like the most common model. So just keep that in mind when you're applying in, that like the structure of how your interviews will go is not going to be as consistent as it would be for an MD only. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that applications for medical school are rolling. So a lot of people will check the yes, consider me for MD only box. But what will happen is that by the time they have considered you for the dual and decided against it and put you back in the MD pool, many of the seats are already filled. So you may want to think about including some MD only applications if the MD is your priority, or some PhD only applications if the PhD is your priority, because very rarely does the step down actually work out. Similarly, because some programs will ask you to interview for both, some will require the GRE in addition to the MCAT. Not that many, but something to pay attention to. And then lastly, for numbers, so MCAT scores are important, GPAs are important. None of us can argue that. I have never been numerically that strong like my entire life. And it was a real challenge. So I was very apprehensive when I applied about the chances of me getting in, because I had a below applicant average score and a below applicant average GPA. And I have a slide deck that I can show you all that had a lot of these numbers in it, but because of that, I was really concerned, and I was like, I got to cast a super wide net. So I applied to 52 programs, which is certifiably unhinged. And I would not recommend doing that under any circumstance. I did it. It was crazy. I did not get very many interviews, and then I only got accepted to one program, and it worked out. So the thing I always say is, like, you're applying for cookies all over the country, and literally all you need is one crumb from one cookie to work out. But my advice would be to you that, like, if you are in that tight a position where it's like a very unlikely chance that you will get accepted, it is better for your career path and for your mental health to consider what you could do in the meantime. Like, I did not need to force myself to apply as a senior in college who was not fully prepared. I could have taken a year, worked in a lab, published a paper, like really gotten my stuff in order. And I didn't, and it made it really, really challenging. So you have options, but 52 applications is chaos, and I would not do what I did. And if I went back and did it again, I would take my gap year, get my stuff together, maybe retake the MCAT, and just feel a little more at peace. But that is not what I did. So I hope you all will learn from my chaotic decision.
To be real quick, I applied to 5 schools, but I was also a special case. One in dentistry, there are a lot fewer programs. So I'm not even sure if I could apply to 52 schools if I wanted to. But I was a part of a guaranteed pre-professional acceptance program at UIC. So I knew that if I met certain requirements, I'd have a guaranteed spot at UIC. So I wasn't as aggressive in pursuing other schools because I knew I wanted to do research here. But it so my number isn't a baseline, but for the purpose of answering the question, I applied to 5 schools and 3 for DMD PHD. And each school was way different with their handling of the applications. And so I think it's important to study your school and reach out early so that you can get in contact with their contact people so that you're ready for the particulars that they may ask as far as an additional exam or an additional interview. Oh yeah, and in the chat, people told me that the PhD might not be right for me too. So it's about understanding what's best for you.
All right, so last question. Can you talk about what surprised you or what you were not prepared for coming from undergrad to grad school? Maybe something you wish you'd known?
I don't think there's anything that really like necessarily surprised me. I don't think there's really anything that can prepare you for how difficult it can be at times. So I would say my like main piece of advice would be during undergrad to just like enjoy life and try and relax a little bit. I know it's very stressful. It's very competitive to get into these programs, but you have your entire life to be stressed out. So enjoy your youth while you can. It's just very challenging. And the analogy they use is it's like drinking water from a fire hydrant, and it's very accurate. But I would say don't let any of that deter you. But yeah, just enjoy undergrad. People told me that when I was an undergrad, and I was like, no, I need to study harder. I need to do all these things. And now here I am telling you what I thought was bad advice. I swear it's not. You'll learn in like 5 years when you're here that you wish you had listened.
I'll kind of echo that. I think the most surprising thing for me was how normalized it is for everyone to be really upset all the time. And like, I've kind of made it my crusade since I've been at UIC. I also like teach for peer education, and like I do a lot of sort of wellness and advocacy stuff because it makes me really sad that everybody's really sad. I just don't understand this. And I would say, like, if you only remember one thing that came out of my mouth today, it is this: you are not supposed to be miserable. That is not part of the deal. It is not in the fine print. Nobody said, by the way, if you want to be a scientist or a doctor or a dentist or a person, you have to be sad the whole time. I hate it. So whenever you get here or wherever else you want to go, I promise you that it is reasonable to prioritize yourself and your life and your joy and also care about your job. But you are coming to this path or whatever path you choose for a personal reason, and there is something important to you and something that you care about. And you should not have the things that are important to you and that you care about making you miserable at any time. So anywhere along this process, when you get to that point and you're like, wow, I really am not happy with what's going on, please do something, tell somebody, complain to your friend, send me an email. I will buy you a coffee and a muffin and we'll just talk about it. Something. I don't care what you do, but find somebody to go talk to and ask them to help you fix it, because I can say very confidently, with the exception of maybe the last 6 months, which have been very rough coming back to med school, but overall, I have been incredibly happy and have been able to like do things that are important to me outside of my career because I have specifically prioritized being happy over being the best. That's like my scale. It doesn't have to be the same for everybody, but whatever your priorities are, you should focus on them and make sure that your well-being is at the top of the list. And I won't tell you what being happy means. You know what it is for you, but just don't forget that that also matters. Without question, that is the most shocking thing about this to me. I am in year 7 of 8 and still I'm like, why is everybody so upset? I cannot explain it, but that is my big shtick, I would say.
One last thing I'll add to this is people tell you, it's important for you to learn how to study in high school so that you'll know how to study in college, or you need to learn how to study in undergrad so you can do well in grad school. I would also propose that you need to learn how to take breaks and relax in undergrad, because if you don't and you start grad school and you have no idea when it's time to stop or what your limits are, then you might hit a wall. And I know for me, like I spiraled, and it's important to recognize your limits. And like May said, you don't need to be the best. You're in grad school doing your best, and you don't need to get every award or get every paper out, because you're no good to anyone, including yourself, if you're burnt out and you never take breaks and you don't know how to have fun. So I think as far as what I wasn't prepared for the difficulties that come with balancing your life and not just doing school and lab all the time. I had to find a therapist. I had to learn about what my new habits are. I had to just figure a lot of things out that I didn't in undergrad, just because I was very focused and determined on getting here. And once you get here, you realize, and you can sort of step back and figure out how important balance is in your life, and how you don't need to be the number one, but you can still make an impact in your lab and learn some really cool skills and become a better scientist for it. So, yeah.
That is a fantastic way to end things. And, and I will also say, having got my PhD, that that graduate school challenges, even if you already know how to study well and take care of yourself, graduate school challenges you in new ways, and you shouldn't feel bad about that, or that it's unique to you. You should definitely, I think, as May has said, really try to, find that community around you and that shared support. Look to your right and left, and all those other students are also struggling with a lot of the same issues as well. So I'm going to kill the chat and kill